2020 will always be an unforgettable year. The world has been through so many unprecedented times, especially with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. 2020 has been especially hard for me personally, as I worked during a pandemic to complete my undergraduate bachelor's degree. Additionally, in January of 2020, I lost my father to liver cancer prior to the pandemic ever being declared. However, despite all this, 2020 cannot be considered all bad and should be reflected upon. The world has made great progress towards beating the virus, and on a personal level, I completed my bachelor's degree, moved to Cincinnati, and started progress on my master's degree, with the hopes of moving up to a PhD level and completing that in the next 2 to 3 years. I've also had a lot of fun railfanning this year after not doing it for so many years prior to now. My videography and photography techniques have also improved dramatically. For the end of the year, I decided to compile my top 15 favorite catches of 2020 and put them into a video. These aren't necessarily my top quality shots or videos, and they're not all heritage units, but they are my top 15 personal favorites. Again, my techniques for shooting video and photography have improved, so some of these shots won't be the best, but they are significant to me or more favorite to me in some way. Coming in at number 15, we have NS34 and NS38, which are the two NS geometry trains. I decided to group these two together just because they're so similar and so short. The first day I caught was NS34, and I caught it in Wilmore, Kentucky. I happened to look at the Heritage Units app that day, and I remember seeing the report by accident. I didn't have enough time to get to Lexington, so I went to Wilmore from Richmond, Kentucky, with about 3 minutes to spare. NS38 was also an unplanned catch. I was in my night class at the time and saw the report, so I went to Winton Place, Ohio while I was on my online night class. I was listening to my class as the unit passed. This one was on January 5th, 2020, and was one of my first catches of the new year. This is at a time when I only really railfan CSX. I didn't really own a scanner back then and didn't really know any train symbols. At that time, I didn't even know what ATCS was. You can also see I wasn't the best at shooting video at this point, as the early morning light in the shot was pretty bad. I essentially had my camera almost pointed straight into it. But anyways, I've always liked this shot, as it had 5 locomotives up front and 1 mid DPU, with 2 of the 5 leaders on the front of the train being older EMDs. Here we have the CSX office car special with the train symbol of CSX P918. I never really planned on specifically catching any CSX special interest units or sticker units at that time. I was a lot more focused on catching the NS Heritage units. But since I lived in Richmond at this time, this made the catch pretty easy. This was also where I briefly met my friend Chris for the first time, and we would go on to railfan together later down the road. This was also an unexpected catch, as I had happened to look at the report on heritage units and seen that it was coming my way. At number 12, I have another office car special I caught, this time through Norfolk Southern, running as NS 943 with the NS 1070 Wabash Heritage Unit leading, which also happened to be my favorite ST70 ACE Heritage unit that NS has. I wish I had decided to leave earlier and go to Georgetown to catch this when the lighting was better, but I did catch it at Fort Mitchell, Kentucky, and I chased it up north through the NS, CNO, and TP. I had ended up planning to follow it to Hamilton, Ohio, but some homework ended up stopping me from doing so. This one's a little bit lower on my list because the lighting wasn't as good since it was nighttime, but it was still a pretty nice catch that I enjoyed. Here we see NS 170 with several surprises. I originally came out the day to catch NS 375 with NS 4003 as a mid DPU, which was my first time seeing the 4003. However, I am glad I stuck around despite the rain starting up, because I heard NS 170 coming north with the Illinois Terminal Heritage Unit on it, as well as 4 retired NS ST70Ms. I didn't really railfan NS at the time when these were still in service, so I am glad I got to see some of them before they're gone for good. Off of NS at least. This was the first and only time that I've ever seen NS 23J, since it runs as an as-needed train. This time there was only a single locomotive, a Union Pacific AC 44CW number 7157 leading solo. I caught this on the same day that I was doing my all-day rail fanning video in Waddy, Kentucky on the Louisville District. I actually sacrificed catching NS 375 that had an SD70 ACE, ACC, and ACU on that train. This is one catch that I didn't really expect to ever see in 2020. CSX K423 with two different Class 1 4 power locomotives, and to make matters even better, one of those was a Canadian Pacific Heritage unit. That particular Heritage unit was an SD70 ACU, which is a script scheme Heritage unit from CP. This particular catch isn't higher on my list because of the lighting. It was almost 11 o'clock at night. There was a kind of a misty rain. It was still cool to see, and I didn't really expect us to catch a Canadian Pacific Heritage unit this year. And I do hope to see one of the CP block scheme Heritage units sometime in 2021. Here at number 8, I have NS 216, led by NS 8103 Norfolk and Western Heritage Unit, and NS 4000, one of the specially panned DC to AC conversions. I had previously caught both locomotives, with NS 4000 leading NS 174 over the summer, and NS 8103 trailing on a Heritage Geo on NS 177 also over the summer. This was my first time seeing NS 8103 lead in my third special interest / Heritage unit duo of this year alone. I also managed to catch it twice, and I couldn't ask for any better lighting, especially at Winton Place that morning. This one was a cool one for me for several reasons. It was a good day as we had several rail fans out with us this day, and it was also warm and sunny, but not too warm where you really have to sweat all day and be miserable. But anyway, this was my first time seeing a BNSF locomotive in person, though I have seen several since then. This was also a brand new BNSF Gevo, and myself and some other rail fans were actually able to stand in front of it and take some pictures by it. Of course, we stayed clear of the tracks in front of it. It was also interesting that the NS SD70 ACU was dead in tow along with the BNSF Gevo on this particular train. This catch will always be kind of special to me, although I wasn't really the best at setting up my shots at the time. As you can see from the video, the electric box was right in the middle of my shot. But anyways, this was NS 1074, the Lackawanna Heritage unit, on an unknown NS train symbol. Although looking back, I believe it was NS 177. I didn't really know my train symbols back then, as I was just getting back into rail fanning, so I didn't really pay that close of attention to that. But anyway, this was my first ever Heritage unit of any kind that I caught, and it inspired me to begin the journey of catching all 20 NS Heritage units. This is what I referred to as the NS tractor train in my video title at the time that I shot this train. Although looking back now, based upon the setup of the locomotives with having two up front and one mid DPU, and based on the time of the day, I'd actually go back and say this was probably NS 143. But anyways, I thought it was a very cool shot, seeing the flatbeds with the tractors up front on this train, and something about that has just made it one of my favorite catches of the year. So coming into these top four, for my top four catches of the 2020 year, it was really hard to kind of split these apart from each other and order them on which was my favorite. But coming in at number 4 is the Conrail Heritage Unit, leading NS 215, and I really did have to fight for this one. I remember I got up early that morning to catch the train, and I made it to Erlanger, Kentucky, only to hear over the scanner that it had already cleared Erlanger and it was out on single track. I managed to get the dry race Kentucky and caught it. Combined with the early morning traffic of Cincinnati and the fact that I had to drive slower because someone had recently busted out one of my truck windows, the only reason I actually caught this train was because of NS 122 and 282, which held 215 in a siding by Dry Ridge. Here at number 3, this one narrowly beat out catching the Conrail leading NS 215, mainly for nostalgia purposes. Here we have an R.J. Corman local I caught earlier in 2020. I believe this was either March or April. This is a former R.J. Corman rail power locomotive, and it had just been transferred to the Bardstown branch, which is also where the My Old Kentucky Home Dinner train runs. And I was lucky enough to catch it this day a couple of times operating with their SW1200. Looking back, I do miss seeing the RJ Corman. I used to see a lot more often back in Bardstown, um, but I get to see a lot of different things now too. Here at number 2, I really couldn't decide between if this was my favorite one or if the next one that I'll show is my favorite catch, but I eventually did have to put this one at number 2. This is the Amtrak Phase 4 Heritage Unit number 184. This was the first Amtrak Heritage Unit I ever caught, and looking back now, this is only one of 2 that I've actually ever caught. But this was my favorite scheme for the Heritage Units for quite a while. But anyway, I caught this in Kissimmee, Florida on a rainy evening in August. This has been the only special Amtrak unit I ever caught in Florida, especially after narrowly missing the big game train this December. And I also especially like the rainy shot of the locomotive at the station, and you can even hear, if you listen closely in the video, the thunder in the background where there was a thunderstorm at the time. So coming in at number 1 for my absolute favorite catch for me personally of the 2020 year, I had to pick the NS Heritage Unit duo I caught. I believe this was in August or September. NS 178 was led by 3 NS locomotives, with the NS 8104 Lehigh Valley Heritage Unit leading, and the NS 1067 Reading Lines trailing third. This was the actual second special interest duo I caught of the year, and this was my first time ever catching NS 8104. This was also my first time ever going to Erlanger, Kentucky, and this was the first time that I ever met several of my Railfan friends. I've had many opportunities to go back to Erlanger and Railfan with many of those same people, as well as Railfan with them in just many other locations around Cincinnati. The lighting was also really good for both shots in Dry Ridge and Erlanger, so I really just couldn't have asked for better lighting or better timing for this catch. So this wraps up part 1 of my 2020 reflection. Overall, I think 2020 was a great year, and I really want to issue some special shoutouts and thank yous to some certain people, and I'll do that in a second part to this video. I know there's going to be some editing issues with this because some videos are in HD quality while others are 4K quality, so hopefully that doesn't turn out too bad.